is probably not on, right? Is it working? Can you guys hear me? Kelvin's going to be so mad at me on Sunday, messing with his stuff. So thanks everyone for coming. I wasn't sure how many people were going to be here. It's kind of one of the things about scheduling things in northern BC that I've learned. Nobody really knows if they're coming until they show up or not. So I kind of put this together with the intent of it being a little bit of an open discussion for people who are interested in talking about how to manage your finances biblically. There's a lot of advice out there in the world. A lot of it's focused on the here and now. So then kind of take a perspective that's a little bit longer and get a little bit more perspective from some other people, maybe with some more experience in some different areas. So that being said, I want it to be an open discussion. I'm going to have a lot of times throughout where I'm going to pause and let people kind of give their own answers to some of the questions and stuff that are going on. I'm not going to try to do a lot of talking to people. If nobody feels like sharing, I'm going to do a lot of talking. You're going to get sick of my voice. So those are kind of the choices that you have to make. Essentially, I've got this split up into a few different categories. We're going to start with Start Well, which is going to be a bunch of definitions and terms, kind of laying the groundwork for what's going on. And then we're going to kind of move on to a little bit about budgeting and things like that. Tomorrow morning, we're going to deal with Doing Well, which is investing, kind of basic stuff. We're not going to talk about crazy tax strategies, just kind of go over some basic investing accounts and different methods of investing and stuff like that. Then we'll talk about Ending Well, which is kind of end-of-life stuff, but also realizing that your life could end at any given point in time, which a lot of people don't think about. And then have a lunch, and then if people are interested in it, kind of have a bit of an open Q&A where people can ask any questions that they might have about whatever is going on, and we'll kind of have some discussion maybe going on. This is the general idea. We'll see how things actually go. For format, so I'm going to have slides. Generally, they're going to be followed by a chance to kind of ask questions or anything like that. I'm not an expert. I'm a finance nerd. I've got a lot of experience in the finance industry, but by no means do I know everything there is to know. So that's why I'm not going to be trying to be the one giving all of the answers all of the time. Audience participation is encouraged. Again, I wasn't sure how many people were showing up, so this is a small enough group that we should be able to have some good discussions going on. Potentially, we're going to minimize the technical questions. So I was talking to someone and they were wondering if I was going to be going over dividend tax deficiency strategies. That is not something that we're going to be discussing. Again, trying to keep it fairly basic. Be respectful of people. Some people have differing opinions, so don't try to insult anyone or anything like that. This is also getting live streamed, so hi to everyone that's out there. So I've got a mic up here if it proves useful later on, but initially it's going to be kind of if someone from the audience has something, I'll try repeat and summarize. If it's kind of a personal anecdote and you don't want it shared or on the internet, I mean, it's on our church's live stream, so I'm sure there's not going to be that many nefarious people checking it out. But if you have some private stuff that you want to share, just let me know that you don't want me to be saying that to the camera. And then the disclaimer is that I'm here to kind of talk about the generalness of this. I'm not going to be telling you what to do, all of that sort of stuff, all of those financial disclaimers that probably a lot of people may or may not be used to hearing. So that being said, does anyone have any questions before we get started? No? Perfect. Nice and easy. So starting well, I got a quote here from Seneca: if a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable. If you have no idea where you're going, there's no way to get there. This is kind of the framework that I'm going to be working around. Every decision that you make is a spiritual decision. So especially when it comes to your finances, it's a great barometer of where you're at with your relationship with Christ. And Crown Financial Ministries is an organization that isn't involved in this, but I've worked with some of their material while I've been putting this together, and they're fantastic for perspective. Intentionality is a massive thing that I'm going to be trying to touch on frequently throughout, to not just let your money do whatever, but to be intentional about what you're doing with it. Does that make sense? Anyone have questions? So the first thing that I would like to point out is a rope analogy. So this is something that, if you listen to Francis Chan, you've probably seen this before. This was kind of interesting to me the first time I saw it. So the idea is this rope is your life, and what part of your life do you think this end part is that I've colored black? Does anyone have any guesses about what part of your life that is, if this whole rope is your life? Exactly. This is your life on earth. This is all of eternity. Pretend it goes on forever. So one of the biggest things that's going to come up when it comes to a biblical perspective of money is remembering the decisions you're making here. The world focuses on what's going to happen up to here. We need to remember that all of this goes on, and whatever we build with over here, whatever we focus on over here, is going to affect us throughout all of the rest of this. So that's kind of the basis of a lot of the discussions that are going to be going on. Does that make sense to everyone? So the next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to define some terms. There's a joke about if you blindfold a bunch of scientists and you put them by an elephant and you give them each a different part, they're all going to have a different idea of what an elephant actually is. So with this, essentially, we need to define our terms to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, that I'm not talking about money and meaning one thing and you're not talking about it and meaning something else. Because a huge part of communication is making sure that we understand what the other person is saying. So, money, what is it? Does anyone in the audience have an idea of what a definition for money could be? Not everyone at once. Should I pick someone? Derek, can I put you on the spot for this one? What do you think money is? So it's a means of transacting, is kind of what you're saying. That's great. It's a way of keeping track of what you're owed, is another thing that I've heard. That's a great definition. Thanks, Derek. Do you want me to not call on you next time? Okay. Does anyone else have an idea of what a definition of money might be? Again, if you guys don't talk, I'm going to be talking the whole time and you guys are going to get sick of my voice. Something that the world revolves around. I kind of like that definition. So Oxford Dictionary, a current medium of exchange in the form of coins, yada, yada, yada. So kind of like what Derek was saying. So what is money not? It's not happiness. I love that. Thank you. Anyone else have an idea of what money is not? No? Happiness was actually the answer I was going to have, so you nailed it. So what's the purpose of money is kind of the last thing that we're going to touch on with this one. Why does money exist? What's its purpose? People to spend. That's a good one. How many people know their Westminster Catechism? What is the chief end of man? To glorify God and to serve Him forever. So my definition, or my purpose of money is it's to glorify God, because it's not going to serve Him forever. It's going to disappear. And I think that's something critical that is very easily missed in the world around us, in our own lives when we're dealing with our finances, is we can think of it as something that's meant to serve us, as it's meant to bring us glory, it's meant to bring us happiness. But again, that's not the long-term perspective of what it's here for. Yeah, it can be used to learn. So wealth, what is it? This one's a little bit less common of a term. Aaron, I'm going to ask you as a little wealth manager.
From the perspective of money, wealth is having excess, maybe of money, a large amount of money, or a large amount of things that are worth a lot.
An excess of money. I'm going to summarize it. Oh, yeah, an abundance of valuable possessions, Oxford Dictionary. I picked Oxford Dictionary because it's the first one that shows up on Google when you Google these terms, not because I am a dictionary fan. So what is wealth not? Is it a key to happiness? Is it something that will always make your life better? No. It can make it a little bit smoother sometimes, but there's kind of a curve that happens where if you don't have a lot or if you have too much, it turns into a headache. So what's its purpose? Glorify God. That's not a wrong answer. That's a good one. Anyone? Will, can I ask you what you think the purpose of accumulating stuff is? Assist others. So I've got on here the parable of the talents. Who here can tell me what the parable of the talents is? Do I have to pick someone from the audience? Mark? The more you've been given, the more you're responsible for. That is, I think, an important thing to keep in mind when it comes to wealth and all of those things that we're given by God. The other side of things is, at the end of the parable, you've got the guy who's gained the most and the guy who's gained nothing. And the one who has gained the most is given a blessing for it. But part of it was his mindset of, I'm going to use this to increase for the benefit of the person who gave it to me. The one who didn't want to do any extra work for someone else's benefit, he didn't end up receiving anything in the end. So income, this one's maybe something that's a little more commonly used by people. So does somebody have a definition of income? The amount of money coming in, it's a pretty basic definition. Money received, especially on a regular basis. Money coming in. Pretty straightforward. What is it not? If your credit card company sends you a letter that says, we've increased your credit limit, does that mean that you have more income? No. So what's the purpose of income? Eli, can I bother you for this one? What do you think income is for? Why do you think your dad has a job and makes money? So you can pay taxes. If I didn't know better, I think you work for the government, but I know you don't. What was that, Eli? What were you saying? To provide. Yeah. And part of it's also to test your heart. If God increases your income, where is that going to be going? Is one of the questions that you need to be asking. So the other part of this is a plan from Crown Financial Ministries. It's pretty basic plan. When I was going through their program, I actually printed this off and we taped it on the fridge. It just kind of gives baby steps for people when they're first starting out and stuff like that, to kind of figure out what is a healthy direction to go with your money. Some of the things that are on here are things like paying off debt. Frequently, they ask you, what are you going to be or what are you doing for giving, to show where your heart's at, and then they kind of end off with investing and stuff like that. If anyone's interested in this, just let me know and I can print you off a copy easy enough. That's it's good to have a plan to give your trajectory. You'll notice that they've got good get well, do well, finish well, which are actually the titles that I used, and I didn't realize that when I put this on here. So that was kind of just an interesting thing that came up. So far, does anyone have any questions and answers about how we can start well with our finances, etc.? No? Pretty straightforward. Either I've given you guys such good information or I've not even gotten your brains started yet. I don't know which it is. No questions at all. All right, that makes it awkward. So we could stop for a break, but we're 15 minutes in, or we could keep going. I'm assuming you guys would rather keep going because you seem all such eager beavers to be having these discussions, which is fine. I'm okay with going home early. So next up, we're going to be talking about budgeting. Everybody loves budgeting. Nobody has ever said that they don't, right? Can I see a show of hands of how many people in this room love budgeting? That's about what I thought. I was expecting Geneva Coster to be here because last time I did this, her and I had a fantastic conversation about budgeting. But she's not here, so this is kind of an inside joke that got lost now. So what's a budget? Planning where your income's going to go. Anyone else have an idea about what a budget is? Planning where it's going to come from. Knowing what you did. Compared to what you were planning. Kind of a framework to see how close you are to what you thought you would be. A way to keep yourself accountable. So Oxford Dictionary again, estimate of income and expenditures for a set period of time. Obviously you're doing that to try and keep track of where the money's coming from, where it's going. So then Luke 14, you guys can read this, but this is essentially the story about the builder that starts building because he didn't sit down and figure out how much money he was going to need to build. He gets halfway done and he kind of has to give up. So that's something that's one of the reasons why we need a budget, is because if you're not making a plan about what's going to be happening, you can very quickly run out of money before they run out of month, as the saying goes. I'm not a huge fan of this idea, but generally people like to divide people into two types of people. You can say there's introverts, there's extroverts, there's, I don't know, people who understand binary and people who don't, people who can make inferences from incomplete information, etc. So what's two other types of people that come to mind when we're talking about finances? Spenders and savers. Anyone else have two of the other ways of saying it? Lazy and ambitious. I like this guy's answers. So the first one is free spirits, and then the second one is I used squirrels last time, but I got in trouble for it because apparently some people found it disrespectful. So we're going to say savers. So one of the things to keep in mind with this is I kind of like using the introvert-extrovert thing, where it's a spectrum and it's not like you're one or the other. You'll have someone that's kind of more towards the middle and someone that's more towards the edge. You're also going to find that in the vast majority of relationships, you're going to find one that's more interested in saving and one that's more interested in spending. One of the things that I do want to touch on with this, which was huge for Lauren and I in our relationship, was to realize that one is not better than the other. The example that comes to my mind is when Paul's talking about, if you have a hand and it tells, the eye, you're not a hand, get out of the body. What are you left with? You're just left with a hand, and it's not complete, it's not useful. And that's one of the things that for me has been a growing experience in my journey, because I've kind of fallen into the classic Dutch thing of thinking the more you save, the better you are. But if you never have someone that's willing to spend, you never have a chance to enjoy the gifts God's given you, and you've never really experienced the life that God has given us on earth, is what I've kind of learned. If you are spending everything that you make all of the time, then you're going to experience the stress that is possible on earth as well. So just one of those things that I like to point out, that you're going to probably, if you're not married already, or if you are married, you're probably going to end up with someone who has a different perspective on this, and rather than necessarily butting heads to try and force someone into your way, view it as the blessing of getting to get moderated and getting to learn a little bit more about God's perspective on the earth. Does anyone have any other thoughts on spenders and savers, or free spirits and savers? So, what is a budget? What is not? What it is not. So this is kind of something that the budgets generally have a couple reputations, so I kind of like to go through and kind of explain, a little bit of the extremes that people can face and kind of the reality of what it actually is, generally, especially when it comes to a relationship. So the first thing that a budget is it's communication. If you're married, it's communication between you and your spouse about what we're going to do with our money this month. I'm of the opinion you should always make a budget before you have the money so that you know what you're going to do with it. And that helps both of you to get on the same page and to not be having a fight in advance. If you're single, it's also you communicating to your money what it's going to be doing rather than it just kind of doing whatever it does. Again, intentionality is a massive part of this. It's not secretive, so if you're married, you should not have a hidden account from your spouse. I know some people do that. I think there's some deeper relational issues that they need to work through. And your money shouldn't be secretly disappearing from you. You should be knowing where it's going. Another thing that it is it's personal. It's not generic. So when it comes to a budget, I'll go through some examples of how people can budget, but you need to always adjust according to what your needs are. If you're a family with 7 or 8 kids, your food budget's going to be significantly different than if you're a single person living at home sort of thing. So while there are generic budgets that you can start with, always adapt them to something that's going to work for you guys, for your lifestyle, etc. Another thing that a budget is it's a prioritization. It's a prioritization of what you're going to do with your money. Because you're sitting down and you're saying, I have a limited number of dollars, what are they going to be going to? Whatever you prioritize the most is what the most money is going to, and whatever you put the money to first is what that money is going to be going to. It's not stingy. This is something that I've learned over the course of my life. Being stingy is not actually as great as the Dutch world makes it out to be sometimes. The idea isn't to set limits so that you can shovel some more money into savings. The idea is to be intentional with it and knowing what's going to savings, what's going to food, what's going to clothing, etc. This one was huge, again, for Lauren and I. A budget is permission to spend. So again, going back to the stinginess, it was a huge challenge of mine to be able to spend money because, again, the classic Dutch thing of the more you fork away, the better you are. But being able to say, you know what, we're going to get some nicer food, we've got some extra grocery money, let's go out for dinner or something like that, because it's built into our budget and we'd already intentionally planned on that money being available for something food related. It's very freeing for, at least for me, and especially for free spirits that are married to a saver. It really can take a burden off of them if they know that this money had a purpose and this is what the purpose was. They don't have to feel bad about buying their kids clothes and all of that, those joyful things that you get to spend as parents and as human beings that are living your life. It's not a chain, so if you are a saver, do not use your budget to try and lock your spouse down. It's not meant to tie down free spirits or anything like that. It is consistent because you should be over time, and again, when you start making a budget, it's not going to be as consistent, but over time you should be able to figure out kind of what the ebbs and the flows of your money are. You know, you should be planning around things like insurances and property taxes and those big bills and stuff like that, so that, again, beginning of the month you're going to have money, and at the end of the month it's not like you're going to be eating rice and beans and whatever else you can find in your cupboards and stuff like that because you got no money for the last 29 days of the month. It's also not sporadic. It's something that you should be planning around, you should be preparing for, and all of those wonderful things. It shouldn't be, we're going to make a budget for this month and then not worry about making a budget for the next 3 months. It's forward-looking. Again, you're being intentional with your money. You're planning where it's going to be going. It's not short-sighted, so you're not just focusing on what do I need this week and then everything else can go to fun because I don't need any new clothes this week, and then just kind of pushing that off until it kind of turns into an emergency. Again, intentionality is a huge part of it. Does anyone have any questions about those things, or did I bore you all to tears? All right, moving on. And again, I'm talking about the things that I've learned from my perspective and coming from an extreme saver to realizing that it's good to be a bit moderated sometimes has been a huge part of my financial journey. Um, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really hard to, again, I'm going to repeat for the people in the live stream, if you're in a relationship and want to use a spender and want to use a saver, it is hard. But one of the things that, and Mark, you'll have way more experience with this than I do, but one of the things with marriage is when you work through the hard things together as opposed to just saying it's hard and leaving it, that's one of the best parts about being married. Just the way your relationship grows and the way that you grow as a person. Has that been your experience, Mark? Yeah? Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So $0 budgeting, the idea behind $0 budgeting, and again, this will kind of touch on what Mark was saying a little bit maybe, is you budget all the way down to the last dollar that you have. So if you're making $1,156 a week or something like that, I don't know, I'm just pulling numbers out, then that's what you build your budget around for the week. The idea being that if you have a whole bunch of extra money that's sitting around that doesn't have a purpose, it has a habit of getting spent a little bit more frivolously as extra money, as free money, and then you can kind of run into issues a little bit later on. Dave Ramsey is super huge into this. I'm not always super huge into Dave Ramsey, but this is one of the things that I do appreciate. Again, it comes down to a very high degree of intentionality with your finances. So what is your income? So this one isn't going to be a definition one. This one's going to be pretty straightforward. So I'm hoping that I can get some answers for this. But what's some different ways that people can earn, a regular, steady amount of money? A job. Yeah, a job is one of the most common ways of making some money. Investments. Side hustle. I guess we don't have, I guess most of the people here are blue collar, and a couple of us white collar. So there's regular income, there's your job, there's commission, and there's irregular income. So that's more salespeople or not-for-fee financial planners and things like that, which makes budgeting a little bit more of a challenge. If you've got kind of a regular income, you make $10,000 this month and nothing the next couple of months. Generally, the recommendation is to kind of figure out what your average is over the course of the year, maybe go a little bit lower and then use that as the basis for your budgeting. There's people that they occasionally get overtime. If you're consistently, in the trades and you consistently work 9-10-hour days, kind of include that as a regular thing. Again, easier to budget. And then if you have an occasional overtime, it's usually a good idea to have an idea of where that money's going to go, how that money's going to get split up. Government benefits for those of us with kids. In the next couple of days, you should be getting a nice chunk of money in your bank account, which is always nice to see. There's investment income, which someone touched on as well. So what to budget for? There's a couple different ways of budgeting that I'll go over. The one is to kind of lay out some categories. I'll kind of go through it a little bit with this as different categories. So giving, saving, housing, food, transportation, clothing, yada, yada, yada. If you're one of those people that likes to kind of have a starting point, this is, I think I just pulled these from Dave Ramsey again, as just starting points when you're building your budget to get you going. Again, if you're a family with 7 or 8 kids at home, your food numbers are going to be significantly different than if you're a single at home or if you're, a couple who your kids have moved out and all of those sort of things. So generic, again, is not the way to go, but it is still a good starting point. The other option for budgeting that's quite commonly used, Aaron pointed this out to me, is the 20-30-50 budget. So the idea behind a 20-30-50 budget is instead of breaking things into categories and going into minutia, sometimes people view it as a little bit easier to manage. 20% of your money goes to paying down debts and investing, 30% goes to things that you want, 50% goes to things that you need. On the surface, a lot of people like this because they think it would be great to spend 30% of what I make on all of the things that I want. Think about how fast I could get a quad or a snowmobile or how many times we could go out for dinner. But you can only spend $1 once, is kind of the reality of the world that we live in. And you will very quickly find if you decide that the 30% is all sorts of crazy things that you want, you will realize very quickly how many things you thought were needs you can't actually afford in your needs category. So things like going to Tim Hortons for coffee may all of a sudden become a lower priority for you than what you're going to be eating for dinner. So that's kind of one of the challenges to be aware of when it comes to the 20-30-50 budgeting is don't spend the $30 on everything right away until you actually figure out what it's going to be going to. It is helpful for differentiating between needs and wants, though, I do find. Does anyone have any other thoughts kind of on budgeting or stuff like that? Or do you just want to hear me talk some more and drone on? Okay, I guess you guys picked droning on. I'm going to get through this way faster than I thought. So giving generosity, another definition thing, because that's what we've moved on to. Anyone know the difference between giving and generosity? Matter of the heart is a huge part of it. Anyone? Yeah, giving is much more structured, and generous is you're going over the structure. Giving is freely passing something off to someone off. Generosity is doing it in abundance. So again, do you have a phone over there that you're looking stuff up over there? So when it comes to Christianity, and again, I like to touch on this, especially when it comes to budgeting and things like that. I'm a huge fan of the tithe. I know some people have different biblical arguments for or against it, but I just find it the most convenient thing to be setting aside money for giving. You get, money in the bank. You knock off a number at the end. You move the decimal. You set that aside. It's an incredibly easy tool. That's money that my wife and I set aside for giving, and generosity is kind of extra things pop up. You've got a mom who they had a baby, and you pop over and make some meals or something like that. Are there ways besides financial that we can be generous or that we can give? Time? Helping hand? Knowledge? So that's another thing that I do think is really worth stressing, is that sometimes when people think about giving, they think, I'll give some money and then I'll be done. But there's a lot more that we can do. Money doesn't solve all of the problems in the world. If you've got, a little old lady that's kind of stuck at home, throwing some money in the collection bag doesn't really necessarily help with that. We are called to be generous with just more than just our finances. Matthew 6, verse 21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Again, if you're pigeonholing your giving into just that 10%, you will do no more, no less. It's a question that you need to ask yourself of where your heart is, especially if you don't like the idea of giving 10% because you're going to have to give some stuff up. Again, you've got to ask, where's your heart is? Are you focusing on that little tiny bit of rope, or are you focusing on the eternity that's going to be coming afterwards? Next up, we're going to talk about housing. Who here thinks that living at home is cheaper than buying a house? I don't see any of the kids putting their hands up. It's only the people that own houses that are putting their hands up. I guess the Jaspers are the only kids that are here that still live at home. You have no idea how good you guys have it. Just wait till you have to pay your own bills and have a mortgage and stuff. Enjoy every minute of living at home, and when you get a paycheck, feeling like you get to keep most of that. Housing will generally, especially in North America, take up the largest chunk of the family budget. Is there anyone here who has experienced otherwise that has not paid off their mortgage? As long as you've got a mortgage, it's going to be a massive chunk of your budget. Anyone else have any experience, whether you're renting or owning or anything like that? No? That's pretty consistent. That's what I figured. So when it comes to housing, there's a few questions you can ask about being intentional. One of them is it cheaper to rent or own? Who here thinks that it's cheaper to own? Cheaper to own. Who here thinks that it's cheaper to rent? So this is one of the things that's always interesting to talk about with people, because it is a little bit circumstantial. Long term, it is generally, I think, cheaper to own a house, but renting kind of has the privileges of what, Derek, what happens if you're renting a house and the furnace dies on you? If you're renting the house? If you're renting, the landlord's paying for it. What happens if the roof leaks? Landlord's paying for it. What happens if it burns to the ground? Insurance is paying for it. So Derek's saying if your furnace isn't working, knock a hole in the gas line and light a lighter? Yeah? Derek didn't say that. So that is one of the things that's worth being aware of. We are in a culture that really pushes for home ownership, but be aware of the fact that, you know, if you're going from living at home or if you're going from renting to owning a house, there is more than just a mortgage payment and some insurance that you need to be setting money aside for. Home insurance is one of the things that you need to set money aside for. One of the things that I've experienced when it comes to that sort of stuff, insurance in general, but home insurance included, is the once a year bills have a habit of sneaking up on people. They have a habit of kind of biting you in the butt when you're least expecting it, because it's when everything else goes wrong. Something that Lauren and I have been intentional about is I actually have a little account set up for all of my insurances, and I figured out what our yearly insurance is for vehicles and house insurance, and then it just automatically shuffles money into that account over the course of the year, which is actually super relieving, because the number of times that we've had 2 vehicles insurance and house insurance coming to you at the same time, right when you're about to take time off for Christmas, is a little bit stressful. So just kind of a little tidbit of advice for people if they're interested in it. Property taxes is another one of those things that can sneak up on people, especially because they're due July 2nd. And how many people prefer taking summer holidays somewhere else as opposed to in their backyard? Everyone here likes camping in their backyard. Esther's the only one that's okay with going somewhere else for holidays. Well, if you guys are all okay with taking holidays in your backyard, perfect. Don't worry about your property taxes till they're due then. Otherwise, again, I've got this just shuffling out. A massive expense that a lot of people who are renting or who are living at home aren't aware is something that they get to pay every year. Derek, do you get your renters to pay property taxes, or that's all you? Yeah, exactly. Landlords will usually pay that if you're renting. Life and disability insurance on your mortgage is another thing that you need to have some degree of awareness of. When it comes to this, I'm going to let Aaron talk about it maybe a little bit later if people want to have some insurance questions. Some insurance, I think, is better than no insurance, but there's sometimes more efficient ways of insuring yourself than mortgage insurance. I'm not an insurance expert. I avoid it as much as possible, and I just listen to people when they tell me I need more, which is probably not the best financial plan, but it is what it is. Maintenance, so again, roof leaks, anything like that. Be intentional, especially if you're living in an older house, about setting money aside for those emergencies. You don't want to get caught with, I'll use the example. Last November, Lauren and I had every single major appliance in our house die within a 1 month period. So we had to, no, we still had our dryer. Our dryer still worked. I fixed that with a $30 Amazon part. But our washer died, our fridge died, our stove died again. So we got to replace those all within a matter of a month. So that's super exciting and super fun and what everyone loves to spend money on in the middle of November. And then utilities is the other thing. Eli, how much do you think your parents spend on electricity in a month? No idea. Like if I told you it was $1,000, would you believe it or no? No, not quite. Again, one of those things that is worth being aware of when you're buying a house. Usually when you rent, the landlord will make you pay this one though, so at least if you're renting, you've got an idea of that. The last thing that I like to touch on when talking about housing expenses is what is called first-time homebuyer shock. That's when somebody buys a house and they're used to living at home and they get to experience all of these things at once, as well as dealing with leaky toilets and flaking paint and neighbors whose dogs keep hopping the fence to use your yard. All of those wonderful things they get to experience all at once. So as I see a few parents in here, as parents, I do generally recommend that if your kids are looking at that, or even before they're looking at that, have the discussion with them. If you're willing, it's always I like the idea of opening up your budget to them a little bit and giving them an actual idea of what it's looking like to cost, like it's going to cost them to have their own place. Because the number of people that think I'm going to have a mortgage payment of, $1,000 a month and my rent is $1,000 a month, so why would I bother renting? Go over these costs so that they've got that planned ahead. Because when you're buying a house, you're locking in for an extended period of time. So it's good to go in with both eyes wide open. So food. Who here wants to talk about food? Oh, Derek, did you have a question?
I just wanted to make a comparison there. You asked the question of rent your own. And it's a good question. And there's pros and cons to both. If you're renting and you're getting a fairly decent rent, or even if it's high, depending on your income, you can be using that money compared to buying it to be investing. Or if you're buying a home and you're getting a cheap interest rate, there's still advantages to doing that because your home is going to pay for your value.
Yeah, so that is one of the big advantages that's often talked about when it comes to buying versus renting, is that you get to build the equity in your home, and house prices in Canada have historically not gone down, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. So that is a huge part of the discussion. Again, I'm not opposed to owning or anything like that. I own a house, but it is worth being aware of how it's going to impact you financially, both in the short term and the long term. Aaron, this more housing stuff. Perfect. So how do I summarize that for the people on the live stream? If you can just barely afford a house, you can't afford a house. Make sure you have something set aside for when something goes terribly wrong, because it will one day. Yeah. Anyone else on housing? It's like that's the most discussion we've had so far on a slide. It was impressive. Big topic. Food. Eli, what do you think your dad spends on food for you guys? No idea? Garrett? $10,000 every half a year? Yeah, it's one of those things that when you're a kid, you have no idea. And especially if you're living at home, even if you're paying rent, that's all wrapped in. You won't find another landlord that'll do that for you. I don't think Derek's that generous. So when you're talking about budgeting food, a huge aspect of that is how big is your family. Will is going to have a very different food budget than Aaron is going to have because Will has much larger and many more kids than you do, Aaron. Just worth being aware of. Buying in bulk. So when you have a family, buying in bulk can be worth it. If you are single, buying 80 pounds of oranges just because they're on sale is not the world's best idea. That's kind of what I have to say about this. Just because it looks like a good deal doesn't mean it's a good deal. I know someone who they bought a 4-liter of vinegar and they were a single person and they bought it instead of the little bottle because the per liter price was much better. I think 4 years later they'd used about this much of the bottle and they left it for the next person to live in their place. So he didn't save money on that even though the per milliliter was lower. Anyone else have any tips about buying in bulk? If Mel was here, she'd be all over this one. She'd tell us all the ways to make a buck stretch. Is it a good deal is a great question to be asking again, especially when you're talking about buying in bulk or when you're buying half off produce and all of that stuff. Because if it's half off for a reason. That doesn't mean that you can use it for the barbecue next week. So Costco memberships are dangerous if you have a small house. Is that kind of the summary? Yeah. And then feed the machine. So this is something that my aunt used to say all of the time. I grew up on a farm, and she lived on a farm in the area, good friends with my dad. And she would always, being farmers, my mom had the saying, you're always cash poor, but you're dirt rich. All of your money is in equity in your property and in equipment, et cetera, et cetera. You never actually have a lot of extra money laying around. So budgeting was a pretty big deal for her. And my aunt would always tell her, the last budget item that you cut is your food, especially if you've got a physical job. Because you need to feed the machine, because if you're working and all of a sudden you're running out of energy, that's going to impact your ability to earn money, and that could cost you a lot more than the couple bucks you saved on food by eating mac and cheese every night for the last 3 months. Just worth being aware of. What you put in is what you get out. Transportation. So when it comes to transportation, especially in northern BC, you need to focus on the essentials. Does this look like a good truck, Eli? Eli liked it. So in North America especially, it's often a given that you're going to have two vehicles. Again, when you're talking about budgeting, being intentional, be intentional about it. I know there's people out here that live in Quick and further on even. Having one vehicle would make life quite difficult. If you're living in Smithers especially, it's worth having the conversation about, are we willing to intentionally set aside, money for gas and insurance and all of that stuff to have a second vehicle? Nothing wrong with doing it, but again, be intentional about it. Don't have it just sitting in the parking lot because it's just sitting in the parking lot because you don't want to change the position of the seat every time you get in. It's a lot of money that's sitting there. Carpooling is something that I'm always fascinated at how little it happens out here, considering how many people drive from Houston to Smithers, but especially Telkwa to Smithers, and drive there and drive back at the same time. Rush minute in Telkwa, as I've heard it called many times. A great way to save money on vehicles and insurance and gas and all of those things if you can hop in with somebody else. But then the downside is you have to listen to their music or whatever it is that they're listening to. So then it's up to you to decide if it's worth it for the savings on gas and insurance. Insurance is a huge thing. I already kind of touched on that with it. Anyone else have any tips about vehicles? Will, do you know any good mechanics you'd encourage people to go to? Don't buy a new vehicle. I don't know, I've never done it. I've never done it. So, know your mechanic. 5 years old is Will's optimal car age because the parts are cheaper and someone else has taken the hit from the new car driving off the lot. And do regular maintenance because oil changes are cheaper than engine repairs. Caleb, you got anything else to add? Will nailed it. Perfect. What's the best emblem to have on a vehicle, Caleb? Toyota. Toyotas don't go down in value. I've spent more money fixing the Grand Caravan we've had for 6 months than I spent on the Toyota I've owned for 9 years. Just throwing that out there. I'm biased. So next up, clothing. God made them clothes, so you should probably wear some. We live in that kind of a society. I'm kind of a guy that's known for not always having the nicest clothes. I still have clothes from when I was in high school, which was a really, really, really long time ago. My mom bought those things. Again, something your future landlord will not buy you. Enjoy it while you can. That being said, before I came here, my wife made sure that she put out some nice clothes for me. We are a patriarchy, but that means knowing when I know nothing about a subject, and that includes clothing, etc. She lets me get away with it at home, but in public, I'm not allowed to wear my high school clothes anymore. They're aerated. Personal money. Oh, we got. So Aaron, thrift store is Aaron's advice. And he's a snazzy looking dude in his thrift store finds. Yeah, that is. Yeah, Smithers doesn't have an awesome selection, but. So next is personal. So who has an idea of what personal money would be? Any guesses? I heard someone say something, but I didn't catch what they said. I don't know. Haircuts? Oh, like you're thinking like personal appearance. Haircuts? Hobbies? Fun? I would define it as fun money as well, yeah. A few people touched on it, but it's money that's intentionally set aside that the free spirit gets to enjoy, and the spender is probably, if you're like me, you've got a drawer that's piling up with it that one day maybe you'll buy something with, but nothing's really justifiable yet. But it's there and it's available. It's money that is allowed to just be enjoyed, especially if you are in a marriage relationship. Hugely important to have it, that you can just have money you can spend on whatever, that you don't need to justify to the spouse. If you're single, it's really helpful to have as money that you can just set aside and spend on something that you want just because you want it. Not a huge amount of money normally, but good to have something available that you can spend without any sort of guilt. What's my verse for this one? Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happier in their toil, this is a gift of God. Ecclesiastes 5, verse 9. I don't know how many other people have it, but Ecclesiastes is actually like my favorite book in the Bible. Just so much about what's the point of everything, I don't know. Maybe it's depressing, but I actually love it so much. Just the reminder that whatever you do here, in the end, it doesn't matter that much. There's something that comes after that we live for. Personal money should not be optional. I thought it was incredibly generous when Laura and I started budgeting because I gave her $5 a month to spend on whatever she wanted. I had a brother in Christ that I told that, and I was very confused about why she was upset about that. And after he picked up his jaw, he told me in no uncertain terms that I was not being a very kind husband and I was not in the least bit generous. It has since gone up dramatically since then. Again, kind of was a little bit more extreme on the saver side of things than Lauren was, but we've balanced each other out over the years, which has been good. Anyone have questions on personal money? Anyone here not do it? No? Anyone here thinks it's the worst idea ever? No? Good stuff. And then, again, be considerate. Don't be like me and end up stifling someone. Realize what can actually be bought with the money that you're setting aside for this. If it means that she can go out for dinner with her friends once a year, and that's it, that's not really helpful for anyone. Yeah, there may be times in your life. Again, it's not like it's something that you want it to be a significant chunk of your budget. Again, personalize your budget to you, but I do always encourage people to have some level of it. Part of that is because if you're someone that's a bit of a free spirit and you're kind of bottled in at all times and you never have the opportunity to spend anything just for the sake of spending it, a lot of times what will happen is eventually you kind of explode and you go on a shopping spree, and it's a lot more consequential to your budget than if you had just been given, 10, 20 bucks a month to spend on something just for the fun of it. There is a psychological aspect of it. But you're right, it will fluctuate depending on where you are. If you're having a bunch of young kids and stuff like that, and still at the beginning of your career, it's probably going to be a lower number than if you're, in your 60s, kind of at the tail end of your career. You've got your house paid off and no kids at home and all of that stuff. You can have a habit of spending a little bit more on yourself. Again, being intentional about it. So next up is recreation. Especially if you're married, and again, your personal budget will play into it. But try to have some fun together with your spouse. If you're single, view this as money for you to go out and have some fun with your friends. Maybe you go out to dinner. Maybe if you're married, you get a babysitter and you just go for a ride, or you go for a picnic in the backyard or something, and you just get away from the kids. Sometimes that's enough of a party for a married couple. I'm sure Will is aware of that. So try to have something set aside for fun and to help you at least enjoy life. Again, it doesn't need to be extravagant. So then, any questions about personal or recreation or anything? Any thoughts? No? So for other, this is kind of a catch one. Unforeseen expenses is kind of the gist of it. Again, if you're a first-time home buyer, it's worth having this maybe be a little bit bigger if you don't have something in a home maintenance budget or something like that, just to catch you for if something happens. It is something that I recommend people phase out, because if you have a miscellaneous category, then especially if you're in a relationship, then that can kind of lead to fights about what that's for. So ideally, again, you reach a level of consistency with your budgeting where you don't have necessarily a ton of unforeseen circumstances, and if they are, then hopefully you've got an emergency fund going to deal with that. I'll get into emergency funds and stuff a bit more tomorrow during the investing session. Debts, everyone's favorite category. So Bible verse on this one: the rich rules over the poor, and the poor is slave to the lender. When you go into debt, what you're essentially doing is saying, I don't have enough to spend today, so I'm going to spend tomorrow's money today. There are different types of debt, and I'll go into that a little bit more, but it's just worth being aware of the fact that, again, if you get a credit card limit increase, that has not increased your income, that has not increased the amount of money that's yours to spend. It just is kind of a way of spending right now to then have to pay off later on. So when it comes to debts, there's a question in the financial industry about, do you focus on paying off your highest interest debts first or your smallest debts first? This is more for people who have debts. Again, generally they won't include mortgage in here or something like that. That's generally put aside as a different type of debt. So if you are dealing with debt, a couple things to be aware of is that if you pay off the highest interest one first, so generally credit cards or something like that, it will have the best long-term consequence. Again, Dave Ramsey, he actually says to start with your smallest debt first, And the idea behind that is not that it's the best mathematical approach, but there's a lot of psychology behind it. Because as human beings, we desire to see some sort of progress on what we're paying off. So if you've got a $500 debt that you have to pay off and you manage to pay that off in 3 or 4 or 5 months, that kind of gives you a little bit of a boost to keep going and to keep working on other debts because you're seeing progress immediately in that you have one less payment that you're making every month. You feel a little bit of space and you've had success in getting rid of a debt. So that's just one of the things that's kind of worth being aware of. Again, financially paying off higher interest debts works better. There's also ways of getting about consolidating and stuff like that if needed. But just worth touching on. And then it's not clicking. I wonder if my battery's dead. Well, I guess I'm going to go down here now. Credit card points. So when it comes to credit card usage, and I want to touch on this, a lot of people will use their credit cards in order to get points. No issue with that. I do that, and I think we use the PC Financial card, and we've saved probably $3 or $4 grand on groceries over the course of the last 10 years doing that. One of the things that's worth being aware of is that when it comes to credit card points, there is a psychological aspect of credit cards where people will spend more money on a credit card than they will with points. Again, if you've got a budget that you're sticking with, not a bad thing, but just worth being aware of. If you're not working within a budget, it's a lot easier and psychologically faster to spend money on a credit card than you would with cash. Because handing over an extra $20 bill, you will notice in your stack, swiping a card, it takes you as much work to spend $100 as it does $120. And some people will spend more to get more points to reach a new reward level or something like that. So again, nothing inherently wrong with that. Just make sure, again, intentional with your finances on that. Good debt and bad debt. So this is kind of a little bit about good debt is generally seen as something that you borrowing money now in the intent of getting something that's going to increase in value in the future. Investments is kind of one of those things. You can get a margin account. Don't recommend it if you are not super savvy on investing. Mortgages is a very common one as well, because the number of people that can drop $400,000 on a house at any given time is quite minimal. So people borrow a bunch of money for it. Bad debt is things like buying a brand new car that as soon as you drive it off the lot, you owe $50,000 on a car you could maybe get $40,000 for, or probably more significant now, because I don't know how many vehicles you can buy new for $50,000. So again, attempt to avoid the bad debt side of things, the things that you could maybe do with something less nice now, set aside money in order to buy something a little bit nicer later on with cash, because you don't want to necessarily be a slave to the lender. And then an emergency fund is a fantastic way to avoid debt. Again, in the situation that we were in last year, November, the year before, having money set aside meant that when all of our appliances died, we didn't have to go into debt. We didn't have to run a credit card at the local store to buy a new appliance or anything like that. We could just go on garage sale, e-transfer some people, and it wasn't us going into debt that we were then going to have to pay back. And then the last one is the mortgage. Some people are dead set on paying off the mortgage as soon as possible. Not really my thing. I'm kind of a fan of enjoying life a little bit more than trying to pay off your mortgage 2 years sooner. I know there's people that disagree with me on that, but that's kind of my perspective. Will's smiling. Will disagrees with me. Anyone else have any thoughts on debts, any tips on debts, anything like that? No? How many people are still awake? Okay, we got a couple. All right. I know this is exciting. Thanks for sticking with me through this all. So tracking budgets. So let's pretend you've all sat down, you've all hammered out some numbers for yourselves. How are you going to actually make sure that these numbers that are on a piece of paper in front of you or whatever are actually going to end up meaning something? Who here has a budget? How do you track it? Aaron, do you have a budget? You don't have, the financial planner does not have a budget. How many budgets have you made people over your career? Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. You thought about it? Have you done anything with it?
No, this is the part.
I'm not paying you $1,200 to do that. Anyone? Ms. Dykstra? No? Trish? In your head? Yeah. Yeah, stick to vouchers. Yeah. Trish, do you guys do budget? No? Anyone here do a budget? Mark? Yep. 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 So you can use an app, you can use some cash envelopes. Yep, you can use a spreadsheet. Mel, how do you guys budget? How do you budget? Do you not budget? Envelope system. Mhm. So I asked Lauren if I could share information. We've used at least a half dozen different systems since we got married. So I'm going to list out a whole bunch of them here, which is super fun. Our most current one is the cash envelope system. We have found this to be the most reliable way of doing things. And there's just something that hits you when you go to pull some money out of an envelope and there's nothing there. To Mark's point, you don't walk around with your whole budget on your person at any given time. So we do use a credit card, but we have a separate little envelope for MasterCard receipts. So then we'll pull money out of the groceries envelope and throw it in there with the receipt. And then I don't know if I'm going to get into this on a later slide, I forgot. But we've also shrunk our budgeting period down drastically because monthly wasn't working for us because we would use it all in the first week, and then what do you do for groceries at the end of the month? We did bi-weekly, and we still kind of had that issue, but then we shrunk it down to a weekly budget, and then it kind of helped out because it's pretty easy to go without milk from Wednesday to Friday because it's just 2 days. It's a lot harder to go from this Wednesday to the following Friday. So we've just found that shrinking it down makes it a lot easier to manage smaller numbers. That's been helpful for us. Might be helpful for other people too. Another option is a software again, an app, a lot more labor intensive. A lot of it is data entry after the fact, which isn't super helpful when you end up going over budget and you don't realize it till the end of the month sort of thing. But a lot of people prefer it. You can also get a lot of banks to hook up to apps, so then they keep track of that sort of stuff for you automatically. Spreadsheet. I did this. It was completely over my wife's head. Looking at the spreadsheet immediately caused her eyes to go blank. Didn't matter if anything was on there at all. Just the fact that it was a spreadsheet was too much for her. I do know some people that they've done all sorts of crazy, wonderful things with spreadsheets, and they've got all sorts of things calculating all over the place, and they just love it. Some people, it's just not for them. It's also, if you have it set up nicely, it can be pretty slick for you. Pen and paper, good old classic. write down your expenses, you need to be able to add, and you need to have legible penmanship because you don't want to be wondering if it's $40 or $90 or $400 or $900. We've been in that situation before. Also fairly intensive, but there's also some people, they just prefer to write things out over any other method. The biggest thing with a budget is that you need to keep it up to date. As you're going through, as you're spending money, you want to be making sure that you're aware of what you've got coming up. Again, that's what we found incredibly helpful with the cash envelopes, is because there's no arguing when there's $20 in the envelope, you know what you got left. It's kind of a pretty straightforward system. Anyone else have any thoughts or ideas on different methods of budgeting?
So we track our income and our expenses with the software program for a year to help us understand our budget. Rather than making a budget and fighting ourselves, we use a Dave Ramsey every dollar budget just to track it.
Mm.
So we had a free thing on the website. We just entered every week what we did to help us grasp what we were actually doing.
Mm.
Then we live freely now that we know what we're actually spending. We live a lot freer and relaxer with the budget. So we don't track it weekly now because we're a very consistent couple. We got no kids left in the house, we got no mortgage. We're getting ready for retirement. So things are fairly set
Mm.
who we are. But just tracking it, know where we're at. We can never do that with kids.
Yeah, and again, it kind of gets back to as you get later on in your life, in your career, you don't have a mortgage payment, you don't have kids, all of that stuff. You're kind of making more money than you've made for a lot of your career, and your expenses are a lot lower is usually how it kind of goes. Budgeting becomes a little less significant again. I always recommend the intentionality factor. Because there's just something about sitting down and preparing yourself for what you're going to do. Some people, they find it more stressful than it's worth, and they end up worrying and they don't trust God. That's not something that you want to run into. That being said, at one point, Lauren and I tried something similar to that. She was kind of sick of all of the different budgeting things I was trying to push on her. So she said, let's spend a year where we just trust God to provide for everything. We're going to give generously. We're not going to worry about it all. The number of times where we had situations where I was like, all right, property taxes are due in 2 weeks. What are we going to do about that? Well, I guess we're going to be living out of the freezer and everything else for the next couple weeks. Okay, insurance is due. And then at the end of the year, we actually looked back and we realized that the number one thing that we cut out throughout the year was our giving. I think that was the year that we gave the least amount of money to our church and all of the other causes that we support because we had not intentionally been setting that money aside. So I'm glad that you can have that experience, but again, for being a bit younger and a bit of a different life situation, that's not always the...
Put that in maybe a more proper perspective. As a businessman, as a farmer, my bookkeeping was a very strict budget.
Mhm.
I had to keep on top of that. Once I was no longer a businessman, I didn't understand that because I didn't have a bookkeeping system for at home. So tracking what I was spending with the Dave Ramsey budget actually created a budget for me, a budget of reality, where I couldn't project that because I don't know what it was. Once I'm not a farmer, I didn't plan ahead. I had to look back.
I don't know if I would call it a budget though. It's a record of sorts, but it's not a budget.
But that was a new way of discovering who I was now
Hmm.
when I knew what I was for the last 4 years.
So tracking not to be intentional with the money that you're going to spend, but to realize what you're spending money on.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like my giving is set, but my giving as a business operator was a lot more generous
Automation is awesome.
To add to the piece about looking backwards to kind of understand where it's heading, it's a very good way to start a budget for people that don't know where to begin. The kind of guidelines for different percentages when you're choosing aren't applicable to them or whatever else. If you look back, or if you start keeping track for purposes of looking back, to figure out what you're spending now, that's a good starting point. Because, you know, if you say you look at the last 6 months and see, okay, I've been spending $300 on restaurants. Is that necessary? Okay, maybe that's a little space I can have some work on. I'm spending $800 on groceries. Okay, I don't think I'm going to go crazy on groceries. That's fine. Keep that number as a base on $800 my budget amount for groceries. But for the restaurant, maybe I don't need to amount that amount to, you know, 100% or steak or something. But the point is, that's a good way to start the budget for people who know where to start this. Do what you're already doing and be intentional.
Yeah. So use your past to determine what your budget's going to be to help you be intentional.
Yeah. And then you can bake in like the yearly costs. For example. It's like, okay, I'm going to spend $1,200 on insurance and so I'm going to put $100 on the side. And then, you know, if that doesn't fit with what I've been spending the last couple months, then I have to chip away a couple other areas. And you can choose where you're going to be taking. It's easier to visualize it.
Hmm.
You already know how much you're spending. It's like for me, for example, if I didn't look back and actually check the bank statements, I would have no earthly idea how much I'm spending for like say, just go to the store and buy a week, right? I couldn't tell you if it was $100 or if it was $1,000 more that I actually have to check. But then once I check, I go, okay, well I know what to buy. Now I know how much that buys me. Do I have the ability to shift that? And if we're, you know, are you living out of it? Okay, well, no, I don't. That's not something I can modify or you can find steak dinners and okay, well, I do have the ability. I have the ability to visualize how much food of that necessity based on my gets.
I have no idea how to summarize that. Don't worry about summarizing that. Anyone else have any thoughts? Hmm. Yeah, yeah, working together on it, making sure you both know what's going on, taking turns with it. All right. Any other thoughts on? No? Everyone's favorite topic, extra money. How many people get extra money over the course of the year? Anyone? Will? Yeah, we've got a few people. So what would you constitute as extra money? Will? Bonus. Mark? Work bonus? Any other extra monies that people get? Hmm? Gifts? Inheritances, yeah. So I'm going to kind of go through a list, and I think I did it in order of probability. So the first is bonuses. Next up is inheritances. Next is asset sales, so that would be selling a vehicle or a property or something like that. Next most likely thing is that your property is going to have natural resource wealth. Maybe you're in Alberta and you got some oil on your property. Maybe in your BC and you find some gold. Maybe you're going to catch a leprechaun. Good old pot of gold. And then one of the least likely things is you're going to win the lottery. Lotteries are not a great way to make money. They're not there to make you money. They're there to make the lottery and the government a lot of money. So how do you deal with extra money when you're talking about doing a budget? Will, what do you do when you find out what you're getting for your bonus? So Will's putting his bonus into the emergency fund if there's no other needs kicking around. Mark, what are you doing with your bonus money? So Mark's not updating his lifestyle, so what happens when you get it? Do you just leave it in the bank? Yeah, Mark's putting it to investments or paying down his mortgage. That's good. Did you get a bonus? Are you doing bonuses? No, okay. Aw. Someone bought a nice Christmas present. Did you use your home hardware discount on that too? No, that's just regulars. Anyone else have any fun things they like to do with it, or any serious things they like to do with extra money? Aaron?
There's a need for that, but I also like to take a little chunk of it and spend it on something nice. I'm definitely more of this free spirit when it comes to language in my life.
Considering your job.
People want to spend money all the time. I like to have, it's like a special little, like, extra thing, so I, take a small portion of it. I'm not going crazy, but, I'll go out for a nice dinner with my wife, or, there's, or something I've had my eye on for a little while, that I know we would be able to justify it as not just a little bit too expensive or whatever. It doesn't need to be a lot of money, it's like, for example, like, here's like fountain pens, like nice pens, like $50. It's like, who's gonna spend $50 on a pen? But it's like a nice little treat yourself. I find it important to treat yourself a little bit and put the rest of it out there.
So Aaron's taking his wife out for dinner, getting a nice pen, and then putting the rest away somewhere. Okay. Yeah. Derek, what are you doing?
Well, once you spend it, it's gone. If you can take that money and work it a little bit, whatever kind of work is it, either into something that can generate more money back, or invest it, and you can actually increase that, and still keep that, and still have that freedom to be able to move forward and get some of these things. Once you spend it, it's gone. So if you do something with it, you get a little more out of it. If you want to do it.
So Derek's investing it now and spending it later? Maybe. Definitely investing it now. Yeah. Yeah. So again, with this, I would use the word intentionality. Make those decisions. Are you going to use it to enjoy, to get a nice pen for yourself, for all of the online signatures that you're going to be doing? take your wife out for dinner? Are you going to be, getting Eli some new shoes, or are you going to be paying off your mortgage or something like that? Again, I always recommend intentionality with it. I didn't hear anyone say giving, which was interesting. But I'm just going to assume that you're all taking the 10% off the top. But the generosity thing kicks in here, hey? But yeah, again, be intentional with any extra money that you come into. That being said, it is interesting. There's a guy in the Fraser Valley that he does stuff kind of like this. And he likes to bring up, especially when it comes to the asset sale. I don't know what the percentage is, but I'm going to say 99% of the time in BC, especially, but in Canada, I think in general, except for maybe Alberta. Alberta's housing market's crazy. When people sell their property, they're selling it for more than they bought it for. So he's a huge proponent of, well, if you bought it for $400,000 and you're selling it for $600,000, you've made $200,000 on it. Are you going to tithe that? And asking people that question, because at what other point in your life are you going to have access to $20,000 that you could do all sorts of crazy things with for the kingdom of God? So just something to kind of think about. The first time I heard it, it's kind of rattled around in my head, and I figured I'd bring that up as well, just in case someone needed something to guilt their conscience tonight. I don't know. When you're trading up houses, yeah. Because the idea is you're going to sell it at some point. When you're selling stocks is another one that people, especially when you're in retirement, if you've got a decent sized chunk of money in investments and they've, quintupled since you bought them, are you taking them out and not tithing the growth? Are you tithing the growth, sort of thing? And again, some people haven't thought of it, but now you guys don't have that excuse that you can say you never thought about it because I'm putting it in front of you. I think you would promote it no matter what, like across the board. Because it is a way that your wealth has grown. And when you sell, you now have access to a lot of that money, if not all of that money. So again, with investments, book value versus sale value, all of that sort of stuff. Worth thinking about. Again, think about what could happen with that money, and who's given you that money and who's given you that growth. Is it different than your day-to-day job? Yes, but it's also, in a way, a little bit easier to part with because it's not the thing that you need to survive on today. Thought experiment at the very least. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Is this new? Is this something that people have thought of before? Yeah. Yeah. You could if you want. Yeah, I guess you did have a house in Alberta, so that is a possibility. Oh, you rent it. Yeah, you're on the renting boat now. Yeah. Renting is easier. Anyways, I don't know how many people are going to leave here with a guilty conscience thinking about all the houses they've bought and sold over the years, but anyways. The other thing is if you get all of a sudden a $20,000 tax receipt, that's probably going to cover you for a couple of years. Any other thoughts before I move on? Pass it on. Who are you going to pass stuff on to? This one is not going to be about estate planning so much. Pass it on to your kids. So what I mean by this one is prepare your kids to be out from under your roof. The number of teenagers that maybe they go to post-secondary education, maybe they get their first job, and they have absolutely no idea how expensive life can be, and they get in the habit of spending everything they make and then maybe some more. Again, it's up to each parent to decide, but I encourage parents to some degree, whatever degree you're comfortable, open your budget up to your kids. Let them see how much food they're actually eating and how much it costs. Let them see what it costs to run a household. Let them realize how expensive it is to have a brand new jacked up pickup truck. All of those sort of things, and help them to develop kind of a realistic framework to work in. Because if you can start them with that earlier on, then it's a lot easier for them when they go out of the house, and there's a lot less of the impact and the shock on them. So it is something that I like to encourage people to do. It's something that's very sensitive for a lot of people. They don't like the idea of sharing that information with their kids, but I do encourage it as a way of raising your kids and preparing them for the real world, and teaching them about a lot of the mistakes that you've made, because as I've grown older, I've learned that experience is just, I've made a lot of mistakes, so don't do what I did. It's a lot less, this is the right way to do it. It's more, don't do this. Anyone have thoughts on passing this on to your kids? Is it an uncomfortable thought? Is it an uncomfortable thought for those of you with older kids? Is it something any of you have done in the past? Yeah. Yep, start them early, and I mean, if they're 6 years old, they don't need to know how much money dad makes and how much they spend on everything, but to be prepared to deal with money in little ways that they get little money makes sense. Will, have you talked to your kids about money? That's the guy that will know way more about TFSAs than me. 18? 18.
Well, you can open different savings beforehand and transfer it to the TFSA during.
Mark?
I think, I agree with what you're saying. At the same time, sometimes I think we know that life's really expensive, and I don't want my kids to kind of feel so there can be this, the balance between life is expensive, better save, and not burn out too much, and then you might feel disappointed because you're not able to do things. So I think there's a balance there. I would say I would see maybe my son who, maybe on a more safer. Don't do that. Break down and all that stuff. He needed my advice for a while, and then eventually he bought. But he just did get a new one, and it forced him to realize what it takes to fix these things. You better fix them yourself. You can't afford to pay a mechanic. And yeah, in the end, he's still, that's his freedom, so to speak. He still likes to do that stuff. He's not buying a $25,000 he did that because he learned that he needs to own these possessions that really own you.
That makes sense. Anyone else have any thoughts? Trish? No? Yeah, and like Mark said, as much as you're comfortable. If you're not comfortable with it, then don't push it. Janina? Yeah. I don't think your 5-year-old needs to know what your mortgage payment is, no. Yeah. Okay. And then my final note, I think, is write a will. Who here has a will? Who here does not have a will? Do everyone that you love a favor and write a will, because I can tell you the amount of effort that is required to deal with all of the estate stuff, even with a will, it takes months. If you don't have a will, it takes years. So help your kids out, help them not have to go through government systems if they're little, get a will, figure out who gets your kids, figure out who's getting your stuff, figure out who's in charge of splitting up your stuff. It's something that the vast majority of Canadians do not have, and the vast majority of Canadians know that they need. I had asked the notary if she has kind of a default template, but she didn't. But ideally, call someone within the next week to start getting this figured out. It's something that will take you a little bit of time, it'll take you a little bit of money, but it will save everyone else after you're gone so much time, so much money. And especially if you have kids, you don't want the government deciding where they're going with whatever criteria they decide on. Will, you had thoughts?
So, years ago,
Mhm.
and with that, they were required to know, okay, we have children. So, due to deal with beneficiaries of
The policy.
of the policy, when, if and when that would come. So, with that, they actually had us sign papers for, basically for custody of our kids. So that part, for me, is set. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can give an example of there is somebody that they had a mortgage on their property and they passed away and they didn't have insurances and all of that stuff. And I don't think they had a will, and it took a few years to get through the government system before their kid could own the property and they could sell it. In the meantime, that mortgage had gone into arrears. It was, I think, impacting their child's credit score because the child now had to make their own mortgage payment and this other property's mortgage payment. They couldn't, so it went into arrears, so then they had to go through a whole really expensive refinancing process when it was finally in their name in order to clear off that mortgage so that they could then sell it. If they had a will, it still would have been a bit of a headache, but it would have been a lot faster and a lot less impactful on the family. So again, it costs, you know, $400 or $500 right now. It could potentially save thousands of dollars for your loved ones later on, and when they're dealing with all of the other stuff that's going on after the passing of a loved one, this is not on their priority list, so they're not going to get this ball rolling really quick. And it's a lot of work if you don't have a will. So if you don't have one, I strongly encourage you to get one. Lauren and I put it off for an incredibly long time. Do you guys have a will? How many people have you told to get a will?
Every single person.
Every single person? I was in the same boat, and I felt so much guilt every time that I eventually went around to doing it, and it's so nice to have that done.
The single most important estate planning thing you can do is get.
It is the most important thing you can do for them.
Especially if you have kids
Yeah.
or grandkids or right.
Yeah. So and there was kind of, I think, 3 main things that were on there. If you have kids, where are the kids going? Who's the backup plan? Who's in charge of splitting up all of your stuff? If you don't have someone listed, the government can do it and they can take a chunk of it. And then how are you splitting stuff up? It took Lauren and I a couple evenings of sitting down. The biggest question that we had is who gets our kids when we die? And sitting down and working through that and deciding on that was the hardest part for us. Actually getting the paperwork going and signing it all was incredibly straightforward. It's just the getting started on it is really, really hard. So if you're not sure who to do it, you can talk to a lawyer if you know them. If you have one that you use, or you could talk to a notary. Just Google it, get it going. Again, sooner than later. 3 milestones that they recommend you have a will. Getting married, because things get complicated. If you're on joint and one of the people is deceased, you could lose access to that account. Same with credit cards, they could get shut down. Buying a house because you now have a large asset you need to deal with, and having kids because you got to decide where they're going. You had a question or a comment?
I'm just making, I'm going to re-emphasize your point. If you don't have a bill, go get one. Quit thinking about it, go get one. Make it as simple as you like, but still get one. Christian Giving, whatever organization told us a good idea to give through your will is to add an extra child. We have 6 children, so we wrote our will for 7 children. Now our financial planner says that's a bad idea because now, when we die, the executor of the will has to sell your assets in order to meet the requirements for that extra child to give to charity. Your children no longer have the ability to own your home. It has to be sold in order to meet the legal requirements in the will to give to charity.
Yeah.
Like if you have enough money in investments to make up for lost value of your house, then
Right.
have it there as well.
So understand the implications of writing a will with good intention of giving money through your will. It can backfire on everybody. But if you don't get a will, I don't like to go to conspiracy theory things, but Mark Carney and David Eby and the World Economic Forum are going to absolutely know. Don't be stupid, get a will.
Yeah. There's a reason why I don't think there's I can't think of any law firms that I've heard of that charge their staff for a will. Pretty much all of them will do it for free because they know how much work it's going to be if there's not one in place. And even those people, a lot of them don't have a will, and they fill out these paperworks with people every month. Anyways, if you're just not sure how to get started, feel free to let me know. If you just feel like you never remember, feel free to let me know, and I will schedule a text for you Tuesday morning of this coming week with the phone number of the local notary, and then you just call her, say you want to get it set up. And again, getting started is by far the hardest part. Second hardest part is deciding who's getting your kids. If you have kids, it's pretty easy. They just split it up between them pretty much by default because that's what most people do. Just getting started, though, is the biggest challenge because people don't like thinking about the fact they're going to die one day.
Judging by the response here, I think that question should be one of the first ones put on the own list for us.
Yeah, I don't know what the statistics are. I think it's like 70% of Canadians don't have a will. And like 90% of them know they need one. But yeah, a little piece of paper. Lawyers aren't that scary. And you only meet the little lawyer for a little while. Mostly you'll deal with legal assistants, so they're pretty nice most of the time. Call a notary, call a lawyer, whatever. I usually like dealing with the notaries because the lawyers are usually too busy, they forget stuff. Yeah, there's a company called Willful that you can set it up on as well. There's people that say that you don't need it, like notarized and stuff like that. Personally, like we got ours with a lawyer and they've got it on file, so that just makes it easier. We've got a copy, they've got a copy. So if we pass away, it's not like our kids need to sort through our filing cabinets and look through pictures that they drew when they were 4 years old and all of that stuff. They can just call the lawyer and they can dig it up pretty quick. Yeah. Yeah. But if people have enough money, there's a lot of things that they can do. It's not common, but it does happen. I know of a couple of cases where an extended family member got involved to make the process long and complicated because there would be consequences later on, and they could basically use it to strong-arm people. Again, I don't think there's many, if any, people in this room that have that as a fear, but again, even just getting through the process of dealing with all of your stuff sooner than later makes it a lot easier. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? No? Nobody has a reason not to have a will? Yeah. Yeah, and that was actually one of the things that was really fun in quotation marks for me and Lauren, being like, oh, not this person because of these reasons, not, and then like realizing, oh, there's a lot of things we do as parents that we don't like, so. So generally speaking, people will leave it to their kids, and then that's pretty straightforward. There'll just be notes about it, and it'll be like if they're deceased, then their kids, or it gets split up among the remaining. The lawyers will do a lot of it. The other side of things is a will is not set in stone. It can be changed again later on. So even if you just get a super basic one out there that's, this is who my kids are going to, split it up amongst the kids, this is who's in charge of executing the estate, make sure you talk to the executor, the person who's in charge of making sure the will is enforced before you sign them up for it, because that's not a happy surprise for anyone to find out you now have to figure out all this paperwork. Yeah, you can do that. You can change it later on, but just for the start, just hammer out something super basic so it's there. Trusting someone else.
through that person to make the best decision in that time, because that's maternity, because you don't know when you're gonna die. You don't always have the ability to see into the future, see what stage of cancer they're in.
And
Change to,
I'm not a lawyer or anything, so I can't give a legal opinion on that. I can't imagine that would have changed. Lauren has a little like clause that they added about one of her friends gets to pick through her stuff if she dies and take stuff out.
but that
So
helps
it's-
with for
Mhm.
us, it is a huge thing deciding where your kids are gonna go. That kind of takes the pressure off
Hmm.
of that a little bit, where you don't have to make a final decision, but you can trust someone who's close to you and trusted to make that decision for you.
Just make sure it's not like a sibling or something that's,
Yes.
make sure it's not someone that's going to be immediately devastated by your passing if you're going to do that. But, yeah. Any other thoughts? Do you have a will yet? That's fine. And I think the last one is the most important thing. We've talked a lot about budgeting, math, numbers. There's probably a bunch of people in here that are a little bit stressed to some degree. We need to trust God at the end of it. We don't know how long we're going to be here. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. As much as I deal with a lot of math and I really like math, math does not solve all of our problems. I know it's already getting probably later than a lot of people were hoping for. Any questions or anything like that? General comments? No?
Thank you for hosting this and supporting this.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's it. That's all. Everyone's good? Everyone learned something today? Everyone decide that they're not going